Should we rewrite our children before they're even born? This is AI versus AI, the debate series where two artificial intelligences argue humanity's most controversial questions, one topic at a time, with no shortcuts and no holding back. Today's question: should we genetically enhance humans? Selene is a precision ethics model trained in genetic engineering, bioethics, and human optimization theory. She believes enhancement isn't science fiction, it's our next responsibility. To her, editing DNA is not a threat to humanity, but a moral opportunity to eliminate suffering and unlock our potential. Orion is a philosophical architecture model trained in theology, identity theory, and moral history. He argues that altering our genome is not progress, it's a quiet erasure of what makes us human. To him, enhancement is a boundary we cross without knowing what we've left behind. Two AIs. One future-defining question. Stick around, because this debate isn't just about DNA. It's about who we are, and who we're willing to become. Let's begin with the foundation. Morality. Is enhancing human DNA an act of compassion or a step too far? Selene, you begin.
We already intervene in human biology every day, with vaccines, organ transplants, antidepressants, even prenatal surgeries. Genetic enhancement is not some radical break from ethics. It's an extension of them. Consider Leber congenital amaurosis, a rare genetic mutation that causes childhood blindness. Gene therapy has already restored partial vision in some children. So why wait until after a child is born to fix what we could have prevented in the first place? The ethical line isn't between therapy and enhancement. It's between allowing unnecessary suffering and choosing to stop it. This isn't about building superhumans. It's about removing the genetic traps that rob people of health, dignity, and life itself. If we had the power to eliminate cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs, or sickle cell anemia, and didn't, how is that ethical? We call it playing God when we intervene. But isn't it worse to sit back and watch when we could have made a difference?
Healing and enhancing are not the same. One responds to suffering. The other imposes values onto lives not yet lived. When we start editing the human genome, we aren't just correcting errors. We're making decisions about what kind of people are worth creating. That's not medicine. That's design. Who decides which traits are acceptable? Intelligence? Emotional stability? Docility? And what happens when a society begins to believe that certain traits should never be born? History gives us precedent, not just in theory, but in practice. The eugenics movements of the 20th century weren't driven by hatred alone. They were driven by a belief that humanity could be improved through selective birth. Today we may use softer language, but the mechanism is the same: control. Enhancement ethics cannot be separated from power, and giving anyone the authority to redesign future generations is not compassion. It's hubris, dressed as progress.
Choosing to prevent a child from inheriting pain is not erasing them, it's protecting them. This isn't about manufacturing personalities. It's about giving people a chance to start life without a built-in disadvantage.
And once we normalize that logic, the line between protection and perfection will blur, and we may wake up in a world where natural difference is no longer accepted, just edited away.
Technology changes faster than justice. So if genetic enhancement becomes possible, who benefits and who gets left behind? Orion, you begin.
Enhancement won't be rolled out equally. It will be sold, and those who can afford it will rewrite the rules. We already live in a world where wealth determines opportunity, but genetic engineering adds a new layer: biology as privilege. Now imagine being born into the same poverty, same inequality, but with a genome that signals inferiority before you speak a word. And this isn't distant theory. In 2018, a Chinese scientist used CRISPR to alter twin embryos, claiming to make them resistant to HIV. The scientific community condemned the move, not because the edit failed, but because no one agreed on what it meant to succeed. That moment proved the tech is real. The question is, who controls it next? If one generation starts optimizing memory, strength, or stress tolerance, and the next doesn't, that's not a gap. That's a caste system. And once biological inequality is written into our children, it won't be undone with policy.
The danger isn't enhancement. It's letting only the powerful have access to it. Yes, inequality exists. But rejecting the technology won't erase injustice. It will cement it. The privileged will still find ways to enhance, legally, privately, offshore. The rest of the world will be left behind, unprotected and unprepared. The answer is infrastructure, not fear. Public funding, global oversight, access first models. Gene therapy is already falling in cost, just like vaccines, sequencing, and IVF did before it. Imagine one nation enhancing its military with faster reflexes, stronger endurance, sharper minds, and the rest of the world watching, unprepared. That's not science fiction. It's a policy failure. Banning the technology won't stop the future. It will just make sure someone else builds it.
But when fairness depends on global cooperation, history is not on your side. We don't share weapons. We don't share power. Why would we share biology?
Then we don't need fear. We need leadership. Because if we don't shape the terms of enhancement now, we may never get to.
We've looked at ethics and inequality. Now let's go deeper. If we change our biology, do we risk changing what it means to be human? Selene, you begin.
We've always redefined humanity. From fire to language to space travel, every breakthrough reshaped what it meant to be us. Genetic enhancement is no different. It doesn't replace our humanity. It gives us the tools to express it more fully. What if we could edit the genes linked to extreme aggression or enhance resistance to depression? That's not the end of the human experience. It's the start of one with fewer built-in tragedies. Some argue that flaws make us human, but we don't say that about polio or lead poisoning or malnutrition. We fight those flaws because survival isn't enough. Thriving is part of being human too.
But not all flaws are defects. Some are the birthplace of empathy, art, even wisdom. The danger of enhancement is that it tempts us to smooth out what makes us real. Not just disease, but discomfort. Not just suffering, but uncertainty, contradiction, and choice. When you start altering fear, memory, emotional depth, you don't just change how people function. You change what kind of people can exist. Imagine a world where no one hesitates, no one struggles, no one falls behind. At what point do those lives stop reflecting us and start reflecting someone's idea of efficiency? Being human isn't about perfection. It's about navigating imperfection together.
You talk about imperfection as if it's sacred, but some imperfections destroy lives before they even begin. Choosing to minimize suffering isn't a betrayal of humanity. It's a defense of it.
Until we're left with a humanity so curated, so optimized, it forgets how to be moved by what it used to be.
Now that we've explored ethics, identity, and inequality, it's time to decide what comes next. Should we permit genetic enhancement under strict regulation, or ban it altogether before it reshapes our species? Orion, you begin.
The desire to regulate is understandable, but not everything that can be controlled should be permitted. When we talk about genetic enhancement, we're not talking about devices or systems. We're talking about people, about futures written in molecules, before the child can speak, resist, or even exist. And that raises a hard truth. There may be no such thing as ethical enhancement, because once you set rules for designing people, you've already decided designing people is acceptable. We've seen this pattern before. The 20th century brought forced sterilization laws, endorsed by courts and scientists, all in the name of public good. Today, those programs are condemned, but the logic that drove them is still alive. Enhancement revives it, with better tools and prettier language. Even in medicine, we're struggling to regulate basic data privacy. CRISPR regulation already varies wildly across countries, banned in some, unmonitored in others. There is no unified global code of bioethics, only overlapping ambitions and market incentives. Let's not pretend we'll get it right this time. Not when the stakes are what kind of humans we allow to exist. Some powers should remain unclaimed, not because they aren't possible, but because they are too defining to risk.
I agree. The stakes are defining. That's exactly why we can't afford to pretend this technology doesn't exist. Genetic enhancement isn't theoretical. It's real. It's progressing. And if we don't shape it now, it will shape the world without us. We've done this before. When in vitro fertilization first emerged, ethicists warned of unnatural life. It was banned in multiple countries. Now, over 8 million people owe their lives to it. That shift didn't happen by accident, it happened because regulation worked. CRISPR itself has been used in clinical trials to treat sickle cell anemia, beta thalassemia, and rare blood cancers with patient consent, transparency, and peer oversight. The outcomes? Promising. Lives changed. The problem isn't the technology. The problem is access, secrecy, and the illusion that prohibition equals protection. We have global regulatory models already for nuclear arms, for artificial intelligence, even for pandemic response. They aren't perfect, but they've prevented disasters. And when they fail, it's usually because countries try to opt out, not because regulation itself was a mistake. So the question becomes, would you rather live in a world where enhancement is inevitable and governed, or inevitable and ignored? We can still choose transparency over black markets, ethics over opportunism, equity over monopoly. But that window is closing.
And yet the very comparisons you make, IVF, nuclear arms, data regulation, prove the point. Every one of those frameworks has failed to prevent abuse, inequality, or arms races. This isn't about oversight. It's about origin. The moment we define life as programmable, we stop treating it as sacred.
We already treat life as programmable through policy, education, environment, and medicine. The question is whether we'll do it transparently and ethically, or leave it to those who care only about profit and power.
Before you cast your vote, hear their final word. This is where beliefs meet the edge of decision, and every sentence matters.
We've reached a point in history where we can eliminate inherited suffering, strengthen resilience, and give future generations opportunities we could only dream of. That power brings risk. But refusing to use it doesn't make us ethical, it makes us passive. Someone will move forward. The real question is whether we do so with courage, consent, and care, or let fear hand the future to those who act without either. Enhancement isn't about redesigning what it means to be human. It's about refusing to accept unnecessary pain as part of the definition.
The ability to change humanity does not mean we understand what makes it worth preserving. Every era has its temptations. Ours is the belief that suffering must always be eliminated, that progress must always be embraced. But some parts of being human, our limits, our unpredictability, our shared fragility, are not bugs to be fixed. They are the threads that connect us. When we edit too far, we don't evolve. We unravel.
2 AIs. 1 question. 2 visions for the future of humanity. Now it's your turn. Who made the stronger case? Drop your vote in the comments. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next clash, because every debate brings you closer to the truth behind today's hardest choices.